Imagine this. 3 years ago, an Australian family walked into the supermarket with $200. They filled an entire trolley. Today, the same family walks into the same supermarket with the same $200, and somehow they leave with half as much. Yet every week, the headlines keep saying inflation is falling. So, if inflation is falling, why does everything still feel so expensive? That's the question confusing millions of Australians right now. And the answer is one of the biggest misunderstandings in economics. Because once prices move up, they rarely come back down. Today, I'll show you why the cost of living crisis still feels just as painful, even though inflation has slowed, and why many households won't feel real relief for years. The first thing most people misunderstand is what inflation actually measures. Most Australians hear inflation is falling and naturally think, great, prices must be coming back down. But that's not what inflation means. Inflation measures how fast prices are increasing, not whether they're increasing. Imagine you're driving down the highway. Yesterday, you were traveling at 100 kilometers an hour. Today, you're traveling 60. You're moving slower, but you're still moving forward. That's exactly how inflation works. Prices aren't reversing. They're simply rising, more slowly than before. And that's why your weekly grocery bill still feels painfully high. Here's the number that surprises most Australians. If a basket of groceries costs $100 and prices rise 10%, that basket now costs $110. The following year, inflation falls to 3%. Sounds much better. Except now, that same basket costs $113. Not 100 again. Inflation fell. Prices still increased. That's why so many people feel like reality doesn't match the headlines, because in a way, they're both correct. Inflation has slowed, but your cost of living hasn't. Most Australians don't notice inflation. They notice what happens. Every Friday afternoon, when payday arrives, the salary goes in, the bills come out, and somehow there's less left over than there used to be. Not because people suddenly became worse with money, but because the biggest expenses have quietly become even bigger. For almost every Australian household, 3 categories now dominate the budget: housing, energy, and food. These aren't luxury expenses. They're the bills you pay before you even think about enjoying life. And that's exactly why the pressure feels so relentless, because you can't simply stop paying them. Let's start with housing. Whether you're renting or paying off a mortgage, housing usually takes the biggest slice of every paycheck. For renters, the story often starts with an email. Your lease is ending. Your weekly rent is increasing. Another $20, another $50, sometimes even more. It's not a dramatic change overnight. It's a series of increases, year after year, until one day, you realize your rent has climbed hundreds of dollars a month without your income keeping pace. Now look at homeowners. A few years ago, interest rates were sitting near historic lows. Borrowing money felt cheap. Families bought homes they could comfortably afford at those interest rates. Then rates started rising month after month, and suddenly mortgage repayments jumped by hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars every month. Nothing about the house changed. Same bedrooms, same kitchen, same roof. Only one number changed: the repayment. And that one number quietly reshaped the entire household budget. Then comes energy. Winter arrives, the temperature drops. You walk over to the heater, and before turning it on, you hesitate, not because you don't want to be warm, because you're already thinking about the electricity bill. So families adapt. They close unused rooms, wear thicker jumpers, use extra blankets, turn the heater off earlier than they'd like. It's a small decision, made every night, across millions of Australian homes. Then there's the supermarket. This is where inflation becomes impossible to ignore. 3 years ago, $200 filled a trolley. Today, that same trolley often isn't full. People compare prices more carefully. Switch to home brand products, skip snacks, plan meals around what's on special. Even families with stable incomes are thinking twice before putting something into the trolley. Not because they suddenly became frugal, because they have to. And here's what's interesting. None of these changes feel dramatic on their own. It's not one enormous bill. It's dozens of slightly bigger bills. Every week, every month, every year, until they quietly reshape the way Australians live. That's why so many people say, I'm managing instead of I'm comfortable. Because surviving and feeling financially secure are two very different things. Here's something most people never realize. The cost of living crisis isn't really about inflation anymore. It's about the new normal. Once prices rise, businesses rarely lower them again. Supermarkets don't suddenly make groceries cheaper. Landlords rarely reduce rent. Power companies don't usually send letters saying, "Good news, we've decided to charge you less." Instead, higher prices slowly become normal prices, which means households aren't waiting for prices to fall. They're waiting for their incomes to finally catch up. And that's a much slower process. Because prices have changed. People are changing too. Families are planning meals before they go shopping. Comparing supermarket prices instead of buying everything in one place. Reviewing insurance. Changing energy providers. Cancelling subscriptions they rarely use. Buying secondhand instead of brand new. Waiting longer before replacing cars, phones, and appliances. Some are taking on extra shifts. Others have started side businesses. Some have moved further away from city centres. Others are sharing homes with family or friends to reduce housing costs. None of these choices are exciting, but together, they're helping households regain something they've been losing: financial breathing room. And this brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning. If inflation is falling, why does everything still feel so expensive? Because inflation slowing doesn't erase the price increases that have already happened. It simply means prices are rising more slowly than before. The weekly grocery shop is still expensive. The rent is still expensive. The power bill is still expensive. For most Australians, the cost of living hasn't returned to normal. We've simply entered a new normal. But here's the encouraging part. Every cost of living crisis eventually changes. Wages gradually rise. Interest rates move through cycles. New housing gets built. Competition returns. Household budgets slowly recover. It won't happen overnight. But history shows economic pressure doesn't last forever. The families who come out strongest usually aren't the ones who predicted the future perfectly. They're the ones who adapted early. They built emergency savings, avoided unnecessary debt, kept their spending under control, and gave themselves enough breathing room to handle whatever came next. So think back to that supermarket trolley we started with. 3 years ago, $200 filled it. Today, it doesn't. That isn't just your imagination. It's the reality millions of Australians are living every single week. But understanding why it's happening is the first step toward making better financial decisions. Because while you can't control inflation, you can control how prepared you are for it. And over time, those small decisions often matter far more than the economic headlines. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.